I don't
So,
know if my kids are going to be
welcome.
excited about algae and moss, though. I see that video. Sorry, go ahead.
No worries, no worries. So welcome. Nice to see you again. And welcome to students watching this later or online at some point. This is going to be a lecture on the wildlife that one can observe in winter. Now, in the past, I was foolish in that I always waited for warmer weather to go out and do bird watching, etc. And then I realized that not only did I miss the migrations waiting for May, etc. But then there were also so many things that I could have seen in winter. Now, as I'll get to again later, the short-eared owl that I just showed, the rough-legged hawk here, not only can you see them in winter, that's the only time that you can see them. So if you're not looking for these birds in winter, there's no other time of year where they're in our area. They spend the rest of the year north of us.
Yes.
Hello. I apologize. Is that Ben, Jody?
Oh, hi. How can you see us?
Oh,
Oh,
hi.
Sorry, we're not muted.
I don't see us.
Hey, Walt,
I'm sorry. So you just muted. So do you have a question?
just asking if you can make the screen bigger, do the full size on the actual
Sure.
images.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes,
Okay,
that's
Okay.
muting.
And I apologize if you're not seeing me. The computer that I'm at is brand spanking new, but the camera setting is not functional, so I apologize for that. So these birds that you're seeing, and we can get back to these in more detail later. This was just kind of an introduction. There are still things that you can see in our area in winter, but then there are things that you can only see here in winter. So I thought that I would just kind of give an overview of the things that one might see in winter if you get a chance to go out, especially now that the weather is a bit warmer. Before I go, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to just say one lesson that I've learned is that there is an adage that there is no such thing as bad weather, only poor clothing choices. And I say that because for years, I just didn't go out in the woods in winter. I would love going out in the woods in other times of year. And just winter, I just assumed it's too cold, etc. But yet I would ski. I knew how to dress for cold. I just didn't when I went out, looking for wildlife. But if I just got in that mentality that, there are just certain ways that you dress if you're going to go, let's say, skiing. If you just do that when you're going to take a walk in the woods, there really is no season that you can't enjoy wildlife in. So, and Jody and Ben, thank you for that option. I will, when there's animals that are doing some action shots, I'll go back to the full screen. It's just easier to me to go through the playlist this way. So a couple of things. Let me just try to give this huge gamut of the wildlife options that we have in our area. First off, one of the things I like is that while there are certainly a lot of trees which have lost their leaves, there are things that we can see from them, including their bark. And so this might be a time of the year that you can, maybe notice things about bark that you didn't notice before, like, those little spaces known as lenticels that you just saw. You can see here where gases are exchanged. You can notice the different kinds, and maybe then even try to learn some distinguishing features between the bark, especially trees which have smoother bark, like the black birch here, the cherries, the sycamores, etc. This quaking aspen, you might notice. Also, I know that we think very often a lot of trees will stop their photosynthesis in winter, but that's not necessarily true. If there's thin bark, especially if the bark has a greenish tinge to it, as you can see in striped maple or quaking aspen, actually photosynthesis is occurring in the bark. So yes, these trees primarily are using their leaves, but they can use their bark as well. So it's not as if the tree is completely inert come winter. And so I think a lot of the year we look, at leaves, and the bark is often overlooked. I think this is a time where, you might, want to brush up on some bark identification. Certainly, as I just said, photosynthesis is still happening in winter. Um, there are still algae, all right, especially in places where water is moving. If you look closely, it's not that all of the green has left us. And in fact, under ice, sunlight is still penetrating and providing the algae the light they need for photosynthesis, which is important because, as I'll get into, a lot of turtles are in the mud and trying to absorb oxygen from the water. A lot of, say, aquatic frogs or salamanders might be doing the same. So oxygen in the water is important. And the fact that photosynthesis can still occur if sunlight is getting through thin, clear ice, that can certainly help the animals which are there. Now, all bets are off once you kind of get to the point where it's snow covered. And so snow would then block that. But still, as I said, there in water is algae which can perform photosynthesis, and on land, certainly, we see plenty of green still here. Now, the winters have been warmer. Now, I don't mind that as a person, to avoid the cold temperatures. As someone who's concerned about climate change, I am worried about the warmer winters. But here you can see that even in months like January, you can get to a point where there's no snow on the ground, as we have today. And clearly anything which is still green, such as these mosses and these other plants, can perform still photosynthesis. Even in areas where the snow isn't too deep, sunlight can get through a little bit of snow. And actually, the snow is a good insulator. So if you had moss out in, say, a cold January, February day, it might be so cold that it would have to shut down photosynthesis. But if it's under a little bit of snow, the snow is helping to keep it warm enough that photosynthesis could still occur. Using a small amount of light which is coming through the snow. Now, most plants in our area are flowering plants, which either if they're annuals die during winter, or if they're perennials will drop their leaves in winter. There are a couple of reasons that you would want to do that. One, obviously, cells can freeze because there's water in there. So unless you made antifreeze proteins, the water in the leaves could freeze and the cells could die. So, that might be a reason to drop your leaves. Another reason is just the weight of heavy snows. If you've got a lot of broad leaves on a branch, just after a snowstorm, the weight could now break branches or maybe even topple a tree. So it might be good to lose your leaves for that reason. Photosynthesis is going to be problematic if it gets too cold. The enzymes just don't have enough energy to work. And also to prevent water loss, the openings for plants, they have to close these stomata because water is really scarce in winter. I know we think that, oh, look at all of this water, but it's frozen. And so a lot of plants just decide to lose their leaves in winter for all of those reasons. But you don't have to, even if you're a flowering plant. So notice here we have some members of this family, like the azaleas. I'm talking about members of this family. They are clearly flowering plants, as are rhododendrons and mountain laurel. Notice, so they're all flowering plants. Now, some of them, like the azaleas, they'll drop all of their leaves. But the other two, they're going to keep their green leaves throughout winter. So even flowering plants don't have to drop their leaves. Now, they can drop some of their leaves. So in rhododendron in autumn, notice the leaves are turning yellow, that they will drop. But here in winter, I know some areas in a state park near me where you're just walking in the middle of January and you're surrounded by green. Not only are there the evergreens, which I'll get to in a second, but some of the flowering plants, they keep their leaves. So mountain laurel, which happens to be Pennsylvania's state flower, which is in the same family as those azaleas and the rhododendrons, I'm going to say, it keeps its green leaves all winter, as do the rhododendrons. In in the same family. The reason they can do this is because they have poisons in their leaves, which make them unpalatable or maybe even toxic to varying degrees to herbivorous mammals. Because otherwise, if these were good to eat, then any mammals like deer would obviously go to mountain laurel and rhododendron sections and really eat all of the leaves. Deer tend to avoid these or use them as starvation foods. So that's something we look at with berries a great deal as well. There are some berries which disappear off the bushes or trees very quickly when birds migrate because they're so tasty. All right, and they're so full of nutrients and birds love them. And then there are others which the will still be on the plants in winter. So birds still have sources of food throughout the winter, but these often tend to be starvation fruits where they're not very nutritious, but nevertheless, when other food sources are lacking, then the birds will still have some food to eat. Now, I mentioned, sorry, let me try to drag you out of the way. Go away. Okay, there we go. Obviously, if you're just really into nature and would like to practice things, obviously winter is a great time to practice your identification of the pine trees and the other gymnosperms which keep their needles. And you say, aha, now I'm getting even better at identifying the white pine with its 5 needles as opposed to the pitch pine with its 3 needles. And all of the other gymnosperms. The eastern hemlock is especially useful in winter because it forms these dense groves, which really help to shelter animals which might hide here from wind and cold. And so places like rhododendron groups, mountain laurel groups, and hemlock trees, and often all these grow together. These are places where even if it's bitter cold outside, animals can be protected by the wind. And so, maybe you want to look at your identification of these trees, or maybe think of the value that they are serving for wildlife. Now, a lot of things are still alive and active in winter. So here, I've just put a camera underneath the water, and obviously you can see this is winter and there's ice on the water. But look at all of the green algae here. So clearly the algae is thriving. It's performing photosynthesis. Notice all of the gas bubbles here. So photosynthesis occurring, producing gas. Once again, this oxygen is going to be useful for any fish in the water, any frogs and aquatic turtles which are hibernating here. And there are a lot of water insects which are going to be active in the winter. So if you found an area where you could access the bottom of a pond and get a little net, you could and find a diversity of aquatic invertebrates. And you can see even smaller ones swimming around there as well. So obviously, not only are these invertebrates active, but then these could be food sources for fish and other organisms as well. All right, so winter is not a time when insects are necessarily gone. As we get into the birds could come in a few different categories. There are some birds which we could expect to see throughout the winter. So for example, this common merganser, all right, these are not only here in the summer, but they will stay with us all winter as long as the water is not frozen. But this is typically the case in rivers and it very often near dams or places where hydroelectric energy is being used. They can still be able to fish. So these are birds which we can still see through out winter. Bald eagles, what I just said, the same would be true, so that they eat fish. And as long as they can have water which is ice free, there you saw a mature bald eagle, here you see an immature eagle, then they can still fish for food. Now, as it gets colder and colder, these ice-free areas, they may become less and less common, which actually makes your eagle hunting easier in that they are often forced to those areas where there's still running water. So for example, along the Delaware, about, I'd say half an hour from where I am right now, there's a stream which comes in called the Lackawaxen. And that area is the last area to freeze. And if you were to go there on frigid winter days, you will probably find eagles. In fact, multiple eagles. I've seen 3 bald eagles in the same tree there because they have nowhere else to go. All of the lakes have frozen. And so if you know where there's still open water, then you can still, find eagles. In fact, have an easier time seeing eagles than you do throughout the rest of the year. Many, we'll get to the great blue heron in a second. Many birds eat plant material, and the plant material is still there. I mean, there's still seeds from previous years, etc. So things like finches, although they won't have their brilliant summer plumage, they will be slightly duller in winter. But if they're eating seeds, all right, then, so here you can see no leaves on the street. So goldfinches, you will see in our area. In fact, in the Audubon bird count, which I just participated in, I'll mention again in a second, we were seeing, big groups of goldfinches of 20 or more. And so they can still stay in our area. There's still seeds to eat. And then the same would apply to sparrows. So, there are white crowned sparrows, white-throated sparrows, and as long as they can find seeds and plant material, then they can stay here. Now, one of the problems in winter is if you were to look at these birds, you can see, they could be confused, but you can see there are some differences. That yellow spot, the color of the bill, which is gray here and pink here. So you can see, that even though these are a little confusing, you should be able to distinguish between them. The problem is that in winter, a lot of the birds simply are a little bit duller than we would see in other times of the year. All right, so whether it be these sparrows, it's a little harder to distinguish between them in winter. All right, simply because there's the bill color. Here you can see it's gray. Here you can see it's peach. Here's the yellow. But you'd have to get them to stay still. I was trying to identify sparrows in the bird count a couple of days ago, and if they weren't staying still, I wasn't confident as to which of these two that I was looking at, because they're so similar. And so if if a bird relies on plant material, whether it be seeds or it can take advantage of some of those starvation fruits, which are left from the autumn, then we can still find birds. I'm sorry. And then there are the birds which I'm sorry, I'll get to those in a second. So the plant material is going to stay here, but so will some of the insects if you know where to look for them. All right, and so woodpeckers do. Woodpeckers know that there are still insects around. A lot of them are just inside the wood and the bark of trees. Woodpeckers are really amazing. So not only have they adapted their skulls so that they can withstand the pounding where they're slamming their skulls into wood and making holes, but then they actually even have a tongue, and hummingbirds are the same. So a woodpecker has a tongue which is so long, not only does it stretch the length of its bill, it actually comes around the back of its head and ends at its eye. So when the woodpecker makes a hole in the wood, it can then stick this really long tongue out, which often has barbs at the end or is coated with mucus at the end, which can then grab insects. And so a lot of the insect-eating birds have flown south, because if you're going to hunt insects, then you're not going to find them in winter. But here, there's no leaves on the trees and it's cold. But nevertheless, if you can hunt for insects inside trees, you can still find them. And so the small woodpeckers like downy woodpeckers, hairy woodpeckers, red-bellied woodpeckers, or even our large pileated woodpecker. These can still be found in winter because, once again, insects are still alive in winter if you know where to look. They're just inside the trees where they won't freeze. There are other insects deep inside the ground. So a lot of our salamanders have burrowed below the frost line. Now, for the most part, they're just going to sit there and wait for warmer weather. But it's not frozen below the frost line, and they could actually still even be hunting insects which are alive below the frost line. And so uh, once again, insects are still around if you know where to look for them, and a number of wildlife still do. And then there are the birds which are we can't say anything definite about them because it depends on the weather. All right. So, for example, this is some trail cam footage from the Audubon Sanctuary at 6.5 Station in Orange County. And this is from December, at which point many birds have flown south for the winter. But notice this great blue heron. It's here, right? And it will stay here as long as there is open water. So its stay with us will depend on the weather. If it gets too cold, it may be forced to fly south or to migrate to the rivers where it can still find open water. But if it's a warmer winter, you could see great blue herons all throughout the winter. You could see bluebirds all throughout the winter. You might even see a robin in the winter. So some of our species in this area, whether we see them or not, depends on the weather. You might see them, you might not. So here is a mockingbird. Once again, kind of occasional. Often you see them. In very cold winters, you might not. And notice that it's eating these fruits. Now, if these fruits were really tasty, the birds which were migrating south in the autumn would have eaten them all. All right, it turns out they're not all that tasty. But that's actually a strategy of some of the plants. Some of the plants are thinking, hey, I'm not going to invest a huge amount of energy in making a really delicious fruit. All right, and yes, the price of that is that a lot of birds aren't going to eat it during the migration. But enough birds are going to be starving in the winter. So even though my berries really aren't all that nutritious, they'll be desperate at that time. And so I can still get birds spreading my seeds, even if I don't invest that much energy into these fruits. Now, some of the birds I like. And so here, same thing. A lot of birds. Once again, are just watching the weather. If there's open water, then, so here you can see, here we have a pond that's beginning to freeze over. Once again, this is the 6.5 Station sanctuary. And so you can still see Canada geese here. You can still see mute swans here. All right, but then a week later, this froze. And so then all of these had to then go elsewhere. Since then, it's melted again. And so now they could be back. All right, and so there are a lot of birds in our area, the bald eagles, some of the ducks. They may move around depending on where the water is frozen or not. Now, something that I did not learn until relatively recently that I would like to pass on is not only can you go out looking for birds in winter, to see some birds, this is the only time that you can see them, like the short-eared owl. So short-eared owls, this is their coming south for the winter, just like some of our birds have flown much farther south, to Georgia or Florida or even maybe Central or South America. The short-eared owls spend most of their year north of us, and this is Orange County is them coming south for the winter. And so winter is the only time that you can see them in our area. And so now's the time to get out. So last week I was out, and at the Liberty Loop, which is the Wallkill River Sanctuary, there are some short-eared owls that come out just around dusk. So a lot of owls, often to see them, you're going to have to, see them with at night with a flashlight. But a few owls do come out at dusk, the short-eared owl being one of them. And so if you go to this sanctuary around dusk, there's a really good chance that you will see these short-eared owls. And this is your only chance to see them. And the same thing would be true of rough-legged hawks, all right, which once again are not in our area all year round. Winter is the only time to see them. Rest of the year, they would be north of us here. So once again, this is in the south of Orange County, this rough-legged, and that was a raptor rehabilitator. One of the neat things about them as they fly is they can hover and sit still in one place in the air. Some birds are not guaranteed that we would necessarily see them in a year, but sometimes you can. So Orange County has had snow geese. It's been a number of years since I've seen snow geese here. But here I am at the college in Middletown. There was a year where we had a really large flock of snow geese just on the pond a half a mile from here. And so snow geese are an occasional winter visitor here. And then there was one year it got so cold that there were actually snowy owls coming to Orange County. I went out looking, I never saw them, but a number of people did. And so one of the things about birding in winter is that there are some birds that you will only see in winter. Now, I had the privilege, I know some of the individuals on our Zoom session did it as well, of participating in the Audubon Society's Christmas bird count this year. And even though it's not summer, and even though it's not maybe that ideal time for birding, nevertheless, a number of the groups saw more than 1,000 birds in the area that they were checking, and 20 species or more. And so it still is a good time to go birding, and I would highly recommend that. Now, the birds are still with us because they are warm-blooded, and I'd like to now show some footage of other warm-blooded animals. I'm just going to have this playing in the background while I introduce these trail cam videos from this. Now, in these trail cam videos, you're probably not going to see turtles or snakes or frogs or salamanders. They are cold-blooded. Now, what is meant by cold-blooded is not that necessarily they're cold. There are days where, a frog or a salamander might even be warmer than me if it's really hot out. Instead, what that means is they don't keep their temperature the same. The environment determines their temperature. So my body temperature, I'm close to 100 degrees in February, the same temperature I am in July. Whereas those cold-blooded animals, when it's hot out, they're hot. When it's cold out, they're cold. And at a certain point, being cold is a problem. It's too cold for you to flee predators, too cold for you to find prey, and maybe even too cold for you to live. So where are the salamanders, the frogs, et cetera? Well, that depends on the species. And so I hope to be making soon more videos where I give a more comprehensive view of, wood frogs are over here, and, the leopard frogs are over here, et cetera. But a large number of turtles, like painted turtles, a large number of aquatic frogs are actually here in this video. They are just under the ice. And I know that sounds crazy because, ice is 32 degrees, Fahrenheit, it's cold. But if you were to go under the ice in the water, more typically it would be, say, 37, 39. And if you're in the mud at the bottom, it's probably around 40 degrees. And so what a lot of them are doing is they're in the mud at 40 degrees. And so they never get to freezing at 32. Now, because they are so cold, their metabolism just runs very slowly. They don't come to the surface for air. A lot of them are just going to take in oxygen from the surrounding water. So that's what, say, frogs or salamanders would do. They would just allow for the diffusion of gases through their skin, All right, unless towards the end of the year, the oxygen runs out, and so now they're in trouble, and now they might have to seek something else. And this is where we get into differences among species. The way they break down glycogen in their livers could help, but that kind of depends. Frogs, therefore, they don't really want to burrow too much because they want to be exposed to water. So even though they could say burrow in the mud at the bottom, they don't want to too great an extent because they want the water to flow over them because that's where they're getting their oxygen. Some other things like turtles, they might burrow a little bit more, but turtles can actually breathe through their cloaca. And so this is odd, but a lot of different animals can perform gas exchange using different parts of their body. The skin, the lining of their mouth, in fish, you can have some doing it with their fins, and a number of different organisms can use their cloaca. That's kind of while in, say, mammals, we would have separate openings for our urinary, reproductive, and digestive tracts. Reptiles, fish, amphibians, they just have one, which is called the cloaca. And it has a lot of blood vessels and can actually do some gas exchange. And so there might be, say, painted turtles under this pond getting some oxygen through their skin and through their cloaca at this time. So we're not going to catch the cold-blooded animals in this video. They're here, all right? Some of them are under the pond. On land, some of them are in rodent burrows or cracks in rocks or crevices trying to get below the frost line, all right? And so what you're going to see here are the warm-blooded animals. Now, a lot of these are nighttime photos, and that's another thing that we often forget, that while we are out during the day, notice that there are foxes here, there are deer, you're going to see a mink in a few minutes, both during the day and at the night, during the night. And so clearly there is wildlife active during winter, but some of it is nocturnal. And so you'd have a better chance seeing it at night than during the day. This deer, I find it a little funny. Notice that it's trying to figure out the ice. It slips a little bit and it's trying to drink from the surface. So, winter confuses us, and I think confuses, them a little bit here as well. But if you ever have a chance to get a trail cam, and there are ones which aren't very expensive, you could then just get a glimpse of what different wildlife are doing in winter. I have some more trail cam footage I'll get back to in a second, but I'd like to mention the rodents. So rodents can be active in winter because, once again, they can have burrows which go below the frost line. And if you were to go to, say, a marsh in winter, you can find short-eared owls at night and during the dusk. But notice here's a harrier hawk flying around. There might be red-tailed hawks and rough-legged hawks in trees nearby, because the rodents are certainly alive and well and active, as is evidenced by these owls and hawks, which are eating those rodents. So a couple of years ago, I was at Liberty Loop, and underneath the snow, you could see this vole active. But notice it had a bit of a gash in it, where apparently one of those harrier hawks or short-eared owls had actually tried to get it, and it had managed to escape it. And so there clearly are rodents which are eating this plant material. So there are seeds, there are roots, there are the plant material from the previous year, and you can see them if you look closely enough. But you can also see them moving in burrows under the soil or under the snow or under the ice. All right, so here we have rodent burrows here. And if you look closely, you can see little rodent footprints. Now, once again, maybe looking for rodents isn't your thing, but once again, this is why the red-tailed hawks are here, the rough-legged hawks are here, the short-eared owls are here. And so if you enjoy watching those birds of prey, we have, some appreciation for the rodents on which they are feeding. So here's if you go to the Liberty Loop, you can just see, the harrier hawks just gliding around all day long. Otherwise, we can, I'm just going to go through some remaining mammals, which we can see. Now, I apologize because I meant to have a few more videos like looking for footprints in the snow. I have some images, but all of the snow melted in the past week. So I apologize. I hope by the end of winter, I make a few more videos on that. But here clearly you can see that the deer are active. And one little note on the deer is obviously they benefit from, those rhododendrons and azaleas and hemlocks that I had mentioned. Because one of the things they don't want to do is get snowbound, because bobcats are small cats, but bobcats can actually take down a deer if it is snowbound. All right, and so that's something we often forget about when we look at things which prey on deer. Deer can usually run away from things, but if the snow is 4 feet deep, then they're in trouble. And something which is perhaps able to run over the snow, once again, like a cat, the deer's mobility might be limited. All right, so here we have deer, and they are, still able to find, vegetation on which they can feed. So, they can be active during the day. They can be active at night. Right. And then here's some trail cam videos, once again, from the Audubon Society, where we can just see some of the wildlife which we often don't think of in our area. So you're going to see foxes, you're going to see coyotes, like this coyote here. And I'll just have this this play. And so winter is a time where you can find still a lot of wildlife. Just like we saw with some of the birds, depending on how cold it is, whether these things are nestled up in a den or whether they are out and hunting, might vary a little bit with the weather, and so if they're able to, hunt for rodents or hunt for other things, if it's bitter cold, then perhaps, they will, just seek the shelter of a den and then wait for more, for better, weather here. So here we've seen a number of coyotes and foxes out hunting for rodents and the like. In one of All right, so I'm sorry, there's two more trail cam videos. And in one of the ones we passed, there was a mink. I just wanted to get to that. So this coyotes, sometimes you'll see them singly, sometimes you'll see them in groups. And so, here's a chance to ask questions about what types of behavior, the animals that live in our area engage in. All right. So here we're going to see the deer. And so one of the things I ask my students, so that's why some of the questions are here. One of the goals is to be a scientific thinker. All right. So instead of asking a question and to say, all right, well, what does Facebook say, or what does Wikipedia say? If you can get out and observe nature or get a trail cam video, now you can actually say, I'm going to observe nature and get the answer there. So I might ask my students, do coyotes, travel in groups or by themselves? Are deer likely to follow trails of other deer, or does each deer forge its own trail? Well, once again, instead of reading about it or asking somebody else, you could just watch deer or watch coyotes and then come to your conclusion on your own. And that's, one of the things we hope that, we all citizen scientists, we can actually observe the natural world and learn from that. We don't have to rely on what someone else says or what this internet site says, etc. Okay. Forgive me, I think it might be out of the, yeah. I apologize. I've been putting a bunch of trail cam videos up. This might be it. Yeah, at the 6.5 station road, there is a mink. I've seen it during the day, but here you can see videos of it active both in during the day and at night. So the purpose of this talk was just to try to pass on like this little bit of wisdom that I learned. I regret not going out into nature more throughout the years. I literally would just wait for the warmer weather, thinking that was the time to go. And it turns out I miss stuff. All right, that there are plants and the things you can see. Not everything has dropped its leaves. You can study bark. There's still algae and water bugs in winter. There are still birds, as I said, the Audubon bird count. And forgive me, Jody and Ben, if you wanted to chime in at the end with the total number of birds, but there were a number of groups that saw more than 20 different species, and I think one group I might have seen 30. There were some groups that after a morning out saw 1,000 birds, like in the flocks of crows and the flocks of starlings and the flocks of Canada geese. So there's certainly still birds out there, some of which who you can rely on seeing because they know where to still get food sources, some of which might vary year to year, that we have a lot of bluebirds this year, or the great blue herons are still here this year, but usually not. There are even then a few examples of things that you can only see in winter, so that you should really get out and see them at this time. And so even though there is a lot of the birds and the plants and the wildlife that we associate with spring and summer that we can't see now, nevertheless, we can still see a great deal. I don't mean to be critical, and I hope this doesn't sound judgy, but if you travel, like if you travel out west, or even if you go to the Caribbean and you go to some islands, they're beautiful, beautiful environments, but they don't have anywhere near the species richness that we do. I mean, you just see the same birds over and over again, or the same plants, or they're just nowhere near as diverse as we do. And so even in winter, we have a great species diversity compared to what you can find in many other parts of our country, parts of the world. So I hope you get a chance to go out into nature and enjoy some of the great winter wildlife that we have. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts? And forgive me, I know all of us have our own experiences from